Think today's celebrities have wild personal lives? Think again. The glamorous stars of Hollywood's golden age were every bit as scandalous, maybe even more so. Back then, famous actresses dated freely, attended lavish parties, and formed relationships that kept gossip columnists busy around the clock. If you weren't getting invited to the hottest Hollywood gatherings, you probably weren't anybody worth talking about. These women lived boldly, loved passionately, and rarely apologized for it. Let's dive into the fascinating romantic histories of some of cinema's most legendary leading ladies. 1. Marilyn Monroe Long. Before she became the world's most recognizable sex symbol, Norma Jean Mortensen was just another struggling young actress trying to find her footing in a cutthroat industry. According to film historian Darwin Porter's biography, Monroe briefly connected with actor Rock Hudson during those early, uncertain days in Hollywood. She allegedly told Hudson plainly that both of them would need to work hard and build the right connections if they ever hoped to make it big. Monroe certainly took her own advice seriously. Her rumored romances with powerful Hollywood figures became the stuff of legend, and her relationships with baseball icon Joe DiMaggio and intellectual playwright Arthur Miller, both of whom she married, showed the remarkable range of men she attracted. Then there was the whispered affair with President John F. Kennedy, forever immortalized when Monroe breathlessly sang "Happy Birthday, Mr. President" at Madison Square Garden in 1962. What often gets buried beneath all the romance gossip, however, is just how sharp and ambitious Monroe actually was. Fed up with being handed one ditzy blonde role after another, she did something almost unthinkable for an actress of her era. She walked away from her studio contract, headed to New York to train seriously at Lee Strasberg's prestigious Actor Studio, and then returned to Hollywood with her own production company firmly in hand. That wasn't the move of a helpless starlet. That was the calculated decision of a savvy businesswoman who understood exactly what she was worth. Her life ended far too soon, but Monroe's legacy, both her undeniable talent and her complicated personal story, continues to fascinate people around the world decades later. 2. Marlene Dietrich. Few careers in Hollywood history match the sheer longevity and reinvention of Marlene Dietrich's. Her professional journey stretched across 8 remarkable decades, from the 1910s all the way through the 1980s, and throughout that entire span, she carefully managed her public image while keeping the details of her private life carefully guarded. Long before she arrived in America, Dietrich was already living by her own rules. Back in 1920s Berlin, she frequented gay bars and drag balls without a second thought, essentially pioneering what we'd now call gender-bending fashion, long before anyone had a name for it. She simply didn't concern herself with what society expected, and she dated whomever caught her interest, men and women alike. Her particular magnetism worked in all directions. Women were drawn to her strong androgynous energy, while men found her smoldering sensuality completely impossible to resist. Once she crossed the Atlantic and became a massive Hollywood star, her romantic adventures only expanded. Among the women she was reportedly linked to were Greta Garbo, Mercedes de Acosta, Tallulah Bankhead, Edith Piaf, and Claudette Colbert. Her discovery by director Josef von Sternberg transformed her from a working actress in German silent films into an overnight international sensation. Her role as the cabaret singer Lola Lola in The Blue Angel, a woman who ruins the life of a buttoned-up professor, seemed almost tailor-made for her particular brand of dangerous allure. Von Sternberg then brought her to Hollywood, where together they crafted her now iconic visual signature, those dramatically arched brows, the expertly shadowed cheekbones, and that quality of seeming both completely available and utterly untouchable. During World War II, Dietrich demonstrated that her boldness extended well beyond the bedroom. She became an American citizen, performed for Allied soldiers near active front lines, sold war bonds, and recorded anti-Nazi radio broadcasts aimed directly at German listeners. Hitler, who had once admired her enormously, declared her a traitor. Dietrich's response was characteristically defiant. "I was born a German, and I'll always be a German, but Hitler isn't Germany." 3. Katharine Hepburn. Even as a child, Katharine Hepburn seemed determined to defy expectations. She reportedly shaved her head at a young age and insisted on going by the name Jimmy. As she grew into one of Hollywood's most celebrated actresses, she held on to that rebellious streak, most visibly through her stubborn insistence on wearing pants, at a time when women doing so was considered genuinely shocking behavior. Her one and only marriage to Ludlow Ogden Smith was reportedly more complicated than it appeared. Smith himself was said to be bisexual, and her highly publicized romance with the eccentric billionaire Howard Hughes. Many who knew her believed it was largely a publicity arrangement rather than a genuine love affair. Among the women she was allegedly romantically connected to were Irene Mayer Selznick, Laura Harding, Jane Loring, Billy Burke, and Alyssa Landy. But Hepburn's independence was never just about her personal life. At a time when Hollywood studios controlled nearly every aspect of a star's existence, she flatly refused to play along. She appeared in public without makeup. She wouldn't pose for pin-up photographs. She declined the standard publicity routines that other stars accepted as part of the job. When she found herself labeled box office poison in the late 1930s, most actresses in her position would have quietly accepted whatever roles the studios offered. Hepburn took a completely different approach. She returned to Broadway, starred in The Philadelphia Story, purchased the film rights herself, and used them to engineer her own comeback on her own terms, a move that would have been breathtaking in its audacity even today. Her decades-long relationship with Spencer Tracy remains one of Hollywood's most discussed love stories, made even more complicated by the fact that Tracy remained married to another woman throughout. Hepburn never spoke publicly about their relationship until after both Tracy and his wife had passed away. Whatever one thinks of the arrangement itself, her discretion on the subject was absolute. 4. Greta Garbo. Unlike many of the women in this story, Greta Garbo never walked down the aisle. Not once, despite dating a remarkable number of men throughout her life. Her romantic history with women, however, is just as extensive and considerably more intriguing. At just 19 years old, while working on a minor German film before her journey to America, Garbo reportedly fell into a romance with a young Marlene Dietrich. When that relationship ended badly, Garbo was apparently so wounded by the experience that she spent the rest of her life flatly denying she had ever known Dietrich at all. After establishing herself in Hollywood, she developed a close romantic connection with writer and actress Salka Viertel, who in turn introduced her to the fascinating Mercedes de Acosta. Other women linked to Garbo include Louise Brooks, Lillian Tashman, and Billie Holiday. Garbo's obsessive need for privacy became as much a part of her legend as any film she ever made. Her famous declaration, "I want to be alone," perfectly captured her public persona. She retired from acting at just 35 years old, having appeared in 28 films, and then spent the remaining 49 years of her life deliberately avoiding the spotlight. She gave no interviews, skipped Hollywood premieres, and refused to sign autographs. The less she said, the more fascinating she became. On screen, Garbo possessed something rare and difficult to define, a quality that blended deep sensuality with an undercurrent of sadness that audiences found completely captivating. Directors considered close-up shots of her face so extraordinarily striking that they became known simply as Garbo shots. Her fashion sense, trousers, clean lines, minimal jewelry, was decades ahead of its time and profoundly influenced how women dressed throughout the 1930s. 5. Alla Nazimova. If any single figure in early Hollywood deserves credit for creating a hidden world for queer performers, it's Alla Nazimova. This remarkable Russian-born actress, director, and producer lived openly as a bisexual woman while simultaneously being married to Sergei Golovin, a contradiction she apparently saw no need to resolve. On Sunset Boulevard, she established the legendary Garden of Allah Hotel, which quickly became a beloved gathering place for gay, lesbian, and bisexual stars of the era who needed somewhere they could simply be themselves. She also coined the clever expression, the sewing circle, as a private code phrase for actresses who preferred the company of women. Her own romantic partners included Jean Acker, Natasha Rambova, Dolly Wilde, Grace Darmond, and Gleska Marshall, with whom she shared her life from 1929 until her death in 1945. Before any of this, Nazimova had been a celebrated stage actress in Russia. Her move to America transformed her into one of Broadway's biggest stars, and when she transitioned to silent films, she became one of the highest-paid performers in the industry, earning an astonishing $13,000 per week, which translates to roughly $320,000 in today's money. What truly set Nazimova apart from her contemporaries was her artistic vision and creative ambition. She used her considerable wealth and influence to produce her own films, most notably a breathtaking stylized adaptation of Oscar Wilde's Salome. The production featured stunning Art Nouveau sets and elaborate costumes designed by Natasha Rambova, who would later become famous as Rudolph Valentino's wife. The film was considered far too experimental for mainstream audiences at the time, but film scholars now recognize it as a pioneering early example of art cinema in America. 6. Tallulah Bankhead. There are bold personalities, and then there is Tallulah Bankhead, a category entirely unto herself. Gorgeous, razor-sharp, delightfully outrageous, and constitutionally incapable of keeping her opinions to herself, Bankhead stood as one of the most celebrated and scandalous figures of her generation. Writer and actor Emlyn Williams once memorably described her famously deep voice as being as steeped in sex as the human voice could possibly go without drowning. Bankhead's appetite for romance appeared genuinely bottomless. She also struggled significantly with alcohol and drug dependency, reportedly smoking upwards of 120 cigarettes every single day. Habits she discussed completely openly, because pretending otherwise simply wasn't in her nature. She was openly attracted to both men and women at a time when such candor was genuinely dangerous. In a 1932 interview with Motion Picture magazine, she casually bragged that she hadn't been involved with anyone for 6 months, adding with characteristic drama that 6 months was 6 months too long. When the landmark Kinsey reports were published, examining human sexual behavior in unprecedented detail, journalists naturally sought Bankhead's reaction. She told them she found absolutely nothing surprising in Kinsey's conclusions, explaining that she herself had entered into numerous brief, impulsive romantic encounters throughout her life, essentially confirming everything the reports described. In 1933, she nearly died following an emergency 5-hour hysterectomy. Upon leaving the hospital, she informed her doctors they shouldn't assume she had learned any particular lesson from the experience. The New Yorker later reported her own claim of having been intimate with approximately 500 people over the course of her lifetime. Among the women she was romantically linked to were Greta Garbo, Hattie McDaniel, Beatrice Lillie, and Marlene Dietrich. Notably, Bankhead preferred the term ambisexual to describe herself, finding the word bisexual insufficiently precise for her particular situation. 7. Dorothy Arzner. In an industry overwhelmingly dominated by men, Dorothy Arzner occupied a position that was genuinely unprecedented. She was Hollywood's only female director during her working years, responsible for nearly 24 films across a 24-year career, and the first woman ever admitted to the Directors Guild of America. She didn't just work in Hollywood, she helped shape it. Arzner is often credited with mentoring a young Francis Ford Coppola, helping him understand the practical mechanics of filmmaking. She spent the final 4 decades of her life with her partner, choreographer, and screenwriter, Marion Morgan. She was also reportedly connected romantically with Joan Crawford, Alla Nazimova, Billy Burke, and Ona Munson. But reducing Arzner to her relationships would be a significant mistake. She directed some of Hollywood's biggest stars, Katharine Hepburn, Rosalind Russell, Lucille Ball, at a time when no one expected a woman to be giving anyone instructions. She was also a genuine technical innovator. When a sound problem arose during filming, she improvised by attaching a microphone to a fishing rod, effectively inventing the boom microphone that film productions still rely on today. The films she made consistently featured women who refused to be defined by the men in their lives, characters who chose careers, who pushed back against convention, who demanded to be taken seriously. This perspective was genuinely revolutionary for the era. After stepping away from Hollywood, Arzner moved into education, teaching filmmaking at UCLA and shaping the next generation of directors, including the young Coppola she had befriended years earlier. 8. Joan Crawford. Joan Crawford built one of Hollywood's most remarkable careers through sheer determination and relentless reinvention. Born Lucille LeSueur in poverty, she worked as a dancer before MGM discovered her, and she fought her way to becoming one of the studio's most valuable stars. She navigated the transition from silent films to talkies, then reinvented herself again from glamorous ingenue to powerful dramatic actress, transitions that permanently ended the careers of many of her contemporaries. Crawford is perhaps best remembered today either for her iconic performances in films like Mildred Pierce and Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, or for the deeply unflattering portrait her daughter Christina painted in the 1978 memoir Mommy Dearest, which alleged serious maternal abuse and was later turned into a famous film starring Faye Dunaway. What receives far less attention is Crawford's bisexuality, despite the fact that it was fairly well known within Hollywood circles for many years. She had a reputation as an enthusiastic pursuer of men, but she was reportedly equally interested in women, with rumored romances including Marilyn Monroe, Martha Raye, Barbara Stanwyck, and Marion Morgan. Her personal style became as iconic as any role she played. The dramatically padded shoulders, the boldly emphasized lips, the exaggerated brows that photographers loved. When she felt MGM was no longer providing her with roles worthy of her talent, she made the bold decision to leave for Warner Brothers and promptly won an Academy Award. Despite how Mommy Dearest has shaped public perception, many of Crawford's professional colleagues remembered her very differently, as hardworking, genuinely professional, and surprisingly warm. She was famous for personally responding to fan mail and for quietly sending encouragement and gifts to fellow performers throughout her career. 9. Mae West, Brooklyn-born. Mae West arrived in Hollywood in the early 1930s and immediately began causing trouble, which was precisely the point. With her deliberately provocative image and her talent for crafting double meanings that sailed past confused censors, she was decades ahead of her time in almost every respect. She openly ridiculed conventional marriage, advocated for gay rights, and pursued relationships across racial lines when doing so carried serious social consequences. West married vaudeville performer Frank Wallace when she was just 17 years old, but she tried to keep the whole arrangement quiet. That plan failed spectacularly when a filing clerk stumbled across the marriage certificate and immediately contacted the press. West and Wallace eventually divorced in 1942. He remained the only person she ever officially married, though her list of romantic partners was considerably longer. She spoke of Paul Novak as the great love of her life. What made West genuinely remarkable wasn't just her scandalous image. It was the fact that she was largely in control of it. She wrote many of her own scripts and stage shows, carefully constructing her public persona as a woman who was sexually confident, completely self-sufficient, and thoroughly unbothered by disapproval. Lines like, "When I'm good, I'm very good, but when I'm bad, I'm better," made her both a sensation and a target for moral reformers who considered her dangerous. She didn't particularly mind. 10. Barbara Stanwyck. Barbara Stanwyck spent 6 decades working across stage, film, and television, building a reputation as one of the most versatile and consistently excellent performers Hollywood ever produced. Directors like Frank Capra, Cecil B. DeMille, and Fritz Lang all considered her a particular favorite. She started as a Ziegfeld girl, moved to Broadway, then transitioned seamlessly to film when Capra cast her in Ladies of Leisure in 1930. She ultimately appeared in 85 films and numerous television productions. She married twice, first to Frank Fay and later to actor Robert Taylor. But persistent rumors circulated throughout Hollywood that her true romantic inclinations ran in a different direction entirely. Many believed her publicist, Helen Ferguson, was the deepest emotional relationship of her life. While certainty on such matters remains impossible, enough circumstantial evidence existed to make Stanwyck something of a gay icon, regardless of the underlying truth. As a performer, she was simply extraordinary. She played hard-boiled pre-code heroines, menacing femme fatales in film noir classics like Double Indemnity, screwball comedy leading ladies in films like The Lady Eve, and Western heroines on television, refusing to be trapped in any single type throughout her entire career. She was also legendarily professional. She rarely turned down work, famously declaring, "I'm a tough old broad from Brooklyn. I intend to go on acting until I'm 90, and they won't need to paste my face with makeup." She proved as good as her word, working well into her 70s, and winning 3 Emmy Awards along the way. 11. Vivien Leigh. The world knows Vivien Leigh primarily as the definitive Scarlett O'Hara in Gone with the Wind and the fragile Blanche Dubois in A Streetcar Named Desire. On screen, she projected a beauty so arresting that her leading men rarely stood a chance. Off-screen, she operated with a similar single-mindedness about getting exactly what she wanted. When Leigh first saw Laurence Olivier performing on stage, she reportedly told a friend that he was the man she was going to marry, despite the fact that she was already married to Herbert Lee Holman at the time. Olivier was equally unavailable, being married to actress Jill Esmond, who happened to be pregnant when Leigh set her sights on him. None of these complications slowed her down. She pursued Olivier all the way to Capri, where he and his wife were vacationing, and a relationship began. Olivier eventually left the pregnant Esmond and married Leigh. After Leigh and Olivier divorced in 1960, she spent 7 years with actor John Merivale before dying of tuberculosis in 1967. Her list of rumored romantic connections included Marlon Brando, Orson Welles, Elia Kazan, Peter O'Toole, Alexander Korda, Stuart Granger, and Justin Mitchell. What often gets overlooked in discussions of Leigh's tumultuous personal life is that she struggled throughout her adult years with what we would now recognize as bipolar disorder. The impulsive decisions, the intensity, the seemingly reckless disregard for consequences, much of this likely reflected a mental health condition that medicine of her era had no adequate tools to treat. Understanding this context doesn't excuse the hurt her choices sometimes caused others, but it does make her story considerably more complex and more sympathetic than simple gossip allows. 12. Clara Bow. Clara Bow was Hollywood's original It Girl, the brightest star of the silent film era, and one of the very first performers to become a genuine mass celebrity. By the time she walked away from acting at just 28 years old in 1931, however, scandal had become her constant companion. Bow had grown up in genuine hardship. Poverty marked her childhood, as did significant family mental illness. Her path to Hollywood came through winning a magazine contest, a fairy tale origin story that matched the era's love of such narratives. Once there, her expressive eyes and naturally uninhibited acting style made her perfect for silent film, and her flapper image seemed to perfectly embody everything the 1920s wanted to celebrate about youth and freedom. Romantically, Bow moved through relationships at a pace that kept gossip columnists perpetually busy. She reportedly treated various boyfriends as though they were fiancés, creating chaos when she inevitably moved on to someone new. The shift to sound films, which destroyed so many silent-era careers, was actually no obstacle for Bow. She had a perfectly suitable voice for talkies. But the relentless pressure of fame, the unresolved difficulties from her troubled background, and the grinding machinery of the Hollywood studio system eventually wore her down. After completing several successful sound films, she chose to retire, married actor Rex Bell, and quietly stepped away from public life. The brevity of her career has never diminished her importance. She essentially invented the template of the 1920s flapper, and her natural, spontaneous approach to acting influenced generations of performers who came after her. 13. Lupe Velez. Known throughout Hollywood and beyond as the Mexican Spitfire, Lupe Velez brought an explosive energy to everything she did. Her performances, her public appearances, and most definitely her personal life. She built a successful career in Hollywood during the 1920s and 1930s, most famously through a series of popular comedies in which she played the wonderfully combustible character Carmelita. Her film persona and her real personality were apparently not very far apart. Velez's great love, by her own repeated declaration, was actor Gary Cooper. They dated for years, and she spoke of him in terms that made her feelings unmistakable. She was also, by most accounts, extraordinarily jealous, regularly and passionately accusing Cooper of involvement with other women. Beyond Cooper, Velez was known for an openness about her body and her romantic life that was remarkable for the era, and rumors persisted that her total number of romantic partners ran well into the hundreds. The end of her life has been the subject of considerable Hollywood mythology, with various colorful stories circulating about her final hours. Her secretary, however, maintained that the reality was quite different from what the rumors claimed, a reminder of how cruelly the Hollywood gossip machine could distort the truth about real people and real tragedies. Whatever the circumstances, Velez deserves to be remembered for more than the sensational stories. She was a genuinely talented actress whose performances brought tremendous joy to audiences, and her legacy should not be permanently overshadowed by gossip. 14. Hattie McDaniel and Tallulah Bankhead. Hattie McDaniel made history in 1940 as the first African-American performer to receive an Academy Award, winning Best Supporting Actress for her role in Gone with the Wind. The ceremony itself told a painful story. Despite her historic win, McDaniel was required to sit at a segregated table, separated from her white colleagues. Throughout her career, she faced criticism from some members of the black community for accepting roles as servants and maids, to which she offered her famous and pragmatic response: "I'd rather play a maid and make $700 a week than be a maid and make $7." Tallulah Bankhead, primarily known as a stage actress, though she appeared in several films including Alfred Hitchcock's Lifeboat, was one of McDaniel's rumored romantic connections. Bankhead, as discussed earlier, was entirely open about her attractions to both men and women, preferring the term ambisexual to describe herself. Her alleged romantic connections with women included Greta Garbo, Billie Holiday, Beatrice Lillie, and Marlene Dietrich, along with McDaniel. Kenneth Anger's 1965 Hollywood expose, Hollywood Babylon, explicitly claimed that Bankhead and McDaniel had been romantically involved, though the claim could never be definitively confirmed. What makes the rumored connection particularly historically significant is that it would have represented not only a same-sex relationship at a time when such things were never publicly acknowledged, but also an interracial relationship at a moment when such connections faced both fierce social condemnation and serious legal obstacles in many parts of the United States. 15. Grace Kelly. Grace Kelly's reputation as Hollywood's most refined and elegant leading lady was only enhanced when she married Prince Rainier III of Monaco in 1956, becoming a literal princess in a ceremony watched by an estimated 30 million television viewers worldwide. Her wedding dress became one of the most influential bridal designs in fashion history. She appeared in just 11 films, but those performances established her as a genuine icon of Golden Age sophistication and glamour. Before the palace and the tiara, however, Grace Kelly had been living quite enthusiastically. It began during the filming of High Noon, when she developed a romance with Gary Cooper, a man 28 years her senior, who happened to be married at the time. Both of those factors, the significant age gap and the pre-existing marriage, would characterize a pattern that continued throughout her romantic life before Monaco. When she traveled to Africa for the filming of Mogambo, she found herself drawn into an affair with Clark Gable, another considerably older married star. She later acknowledged that the chance to work with Gable was one of the major reasons she took the role. Her famous comment about the situation was perfectly casual. "What else is there to do if you're alone in a tent in Africa with Clark Gable?" Among her other romantic connections before settling down with Prince Rainier were Bing Crosby, Marlon Brando, Ray Milland, Oleg Cassini, and even Prince Ali Khan, leader of the Nizari Ismaili Muslims, making him the second royalty in her romantic history before the one she actually married. The transformation from Hollywood actress to Monegasque princess was storybook complete. But the story before that fairy tale chapter was rather more interesting than the princess image suggested. These women lived in a world that wanted them glamorous and unthreatening, beautiful and compliant. Most of them refused those terms entirely. Whatever one thinks of their individual choices, the sheer audacity with which they insisted on living on their own terms, in an era that offered women so few of them, deserves recognition. Hollywood's golden age was golden partly because these women burned so brightly within it.